Welcome to the Unit 7.6 Synopsis video. This video gives a big picture look at Unit 7.6, introducing the unit challenge scenario, the flow of lessons, and the background content required. Unit 7.6 is designed for 7th grade and is the 6th unit for the school year. It's comprised of 8 lessons, including the unit opener and unit closer, requiring a minimum of 31 50-minute class periods. The semester unifying cross-cutting concept is structure and function. The full title of Unit 7.6 is The Popsicle Vandal, Inheritance of Traits. In this unit, students investigate how individuals can have traits such as red-green colorblindness that their family members do not have. They develop evidence-based models to explain this phenomenon using ideas of genetics and inheritance. The unit heavily focuses on the role of proteins as the key link between genes and observable traits. To help clarify this concept, students develop an evidence-based model to describe how a genetic code creates a protein with a specific shape, how the protein's shape in turn affects how the protein functions inside an organism, and how the protein's function determines one of the organism's traits. Do not worry, this model is not made all at once. Rather, it is built step by step over several lessons. This understanding of proteins eventually leads students to question how we obtain the specific genes in our DNA. Students will develop a model to explain that in the process of sexual reproduction, we each obtain half of our genes from each parent at random, resulting in offspring who are different from one another, each with a unique genetic makeup. Unit 7.6 is built upon a chain of causality that is a central pillar of life science. Your genes are determined by which chromosomes you inherit from your parents. Your genes determine your protein shape. Protein shape determines protein function, and protein function determines traits. Students discover this chain of causality link by link as they progress through the unit. As with all MyStar units, Lesson 1 engages students in the unit challenge. They are given a task that activates their prior knowledge and exposes their prior understanding related to the unit challenge. They are provided images of famous siblings like Venus and Serena Williams. They must compare and contrast the siblings' traits and use their prior knowledge to explain why members of the same family have some traits in common but not others. Next, students are introduced to the case of the popsicle vandal. A girl named Becky discovers that her brother Joe is colorblind after Joe accidentally vandalizes all of her favorite lime popsicles. It turns out that Joe has difficulty telling the different popsicle colors apart, and he takes a bite out of several lime popsicles in an unsuccessful search for a cherry popsicle. The fact that Becky can easily distinguish these colors but Joe cannot leads to the unit challenge question. How is it possible that people can have traits that others in their family do not have? At the end of the lesson, the class makes a unit bubble map. Students consider what they need to learn in order to answer the unit challenge question and record their thoughts on the unit bubble map. The bubble map, shown on this slide, features questions students came up with in a real classroom at the end of Lesson 1, such as, how do we see color? What is a gene? Why can't Joe see color? The unit bubble map is revisited and updated during the unit, reflecting the greater understanding students achieve as they progress through each lesson. Revisit and update often with your students to help them feel in control of their learning. Before students can explain why Joe and Becky see differently, students need a common understanding of how our senses work. Throughout this lesson, students learn how humans perceive the environment around them through their senses. During Lesson 2, students develop an initial model of how our senses work. A stimulus, for example light, interacts with specialized sensing cells. These cells start a signal, which is a chain of chemical reactions. This signal spreads through the cell and down a nerve to the brain. The brain then processes the signal and interprets it as our sense of sight. Students will continue to build on this initial model as they learn more about how our senses work. In this lesson, students discover that proteins perform many functions in our bodies, allowing us to sense the tastes, sensations, smells, and colors around us. In previous units, students encountered proteins as an important nutrient in a healthy diet, but this is the first time they uncover what proteins do. They learn that proteins are a special type of molecule found throughout the body, that there are many unique proteins, each protein has a function, and that there are many types of proteins carrying out a vast array of diverse functions in our bodies. Students begin their investigation into the role of proteins by figuring out how taste works. They learn that there is a protein on the tongue that determines whether a person can taste a very bitter substance called PTC. Those with a certain protein shape can taste the bitter substance, while those with a different shape cannot taste it. Students use models to uncover how the shape of the protein results in the function of the protein. Differently shaped proteins lead to different functions, and different functions result in different traits. This allows students to explain how Joe and Becky perceive color differently. Joe and Becky perceive color differently because the proteins in their eyes are shaped differently. In Becky's eyes, the proteins are all different shapes, which allows her to perceive all colors. In Joe's eyes, the red and green proteins have very similar shapes. This causes his eyes to send confusing signals to his brain, making distinguishing colors difficult. This provides a superficial answer to the unit challenge, but it also leads to a new and pressing question. Why do Joe and Becky have different proteins in their eyes? In this lesson, students investigate why Joe and Becky have differently shaped proteins in their eyes. They discover that differences in Joe and Becky's genetic codes are responsible for the differences in the shapes of the proteins in their eyes. This lesson is the students' first formal introduction to genes. Students use physical models to act out a simplified version of how proteins are made from the genetic code within cells. While middle schoolers do not need to understand the details of how proteins get made inside a cell, it is important that students understand that a person's genetic code determines the way their proteins are built. By the end of this lesson, students should be able to explain how differences in genes cause differences in traits. This lesson plays an important role in the unit because it is the bridge between understanding what causes traits and how we inherit traits. At this point in the unit, students likely want to investigate why Joe and Becky have different versions of the gene that makes the proteins in their eyes. This is a natural question that arises from the previous lesson, but before students can investigate it, they need foundational knowledge about where genes are found in the body and the relationship of genes to chromosomes. To do this, students investigate a different question that they probably do not have enough knowledge to fully answer yet. Where in our bodies are our genes? Using microscopes and a special stain, students discover that genes are found within an organism's cells. Additionally, students identify that most of the time, these genes appear as circular bodies within the cell, for example, the nuclei. But there are also times where they appear as distinct worm-shaped structures, for example, chromosomes. Finally, through the use of special images of chromosomes called karyotypes, the students identify the location of the gene that makes the eye proteins on a special chromosome pair called the XY chromosomes. Having established the relationship between genes and chromosomes, students are ready to investigate why Joe and Becky have different genes using models of sexual reproduction. Rest assured, we are not investigating the birds and the bees. Instead, we're trying to figure out where a baby's genes come from. Using models, students discover why parents only pass on half their chromosomes and why chromosomes are inherited randomly. At this point, students understand that Joe and Becky each received half their genes from their parents at random. Due to pure luck, Joe received an X chromosome from his mom that contained the gene that leads to color blindness, and a Y chromosome that does not carry the gene at all from his dad. At this point, students have all the evidence they need to construct an explanation for why Joe is colorblind but Becky is not. However, combining all of these pieces of evidence into a single coherent explanation is a skill in and of itself, and many middle school students struggle with constructing multi-part explanations. This lesson is designed to help students fit their different models together to develop a complete explanation for how it is possible that Joe is colorblind when Becky isn't. Students practice using a gotta-have checklist to combine multiple models into one explanation. Going into the unit closer, students will have an explanation supported by evidence that encompasses the unit's big ideas. Specifically, Joe randomly received his colorblindness gene from his mom, who carries a version of the gene that makes a misshapen eye protein, which causes the red and green colors to be confused by the brain. Becky, meanwhile, received typical genes from both parents. Her genes make eye proteins that have distinct shapes, and so her brain receives distinct signals when she perceives colors. Since students already created their final student product in Lesson 7, the focus of this unit closer is on peer review and refinement of each other's products, connecting to possible careers and reflecting on their learning. You can find out more about Unit 7.6 by taking the Unit 7.6 Primer course and looking at the resources on the MyStar website at the address at the bottom of this page. Thank you for watching the MyStar Unit 7.6 Synopsis video.